Okay, let me start, Edwina. Welcome, everybody. I would like to welcome you to our webinar today, which is entitled Leadership as Masterpiece Creation. Our keynote speaker is Charles Spinosa, who draws on ideas from the humanities, academia, and 20 plus years of consulting experience. Looking through the people who registered, we have people from Ireland, the UK, the US, and further afield. I see many clients and many former clients, some of whom have actually participated and worked with Charles and myself on creating masterpieces in their organizations, and actually preparing themselves to face the challenges associated with that. I have many friends joined us, colleagues and former colleagues, and welcome to you all. I'm delighted that Fiona Ross and Mike Hobday have joined us as panelists. Fiona is an experienced public and private sector chair and non-executive director, spending many areas working within capital projects in Dublin, London, Europe, and the US. And Mike is CEO of AntWorks, just parachuted in from Las Vegas, he tells us, a leader in intelligent document processing and passionate about using generative AI and automation to solve real world problems. Who are Vision? We're a company that for the last 20 years or longer has focused on using thinking, particularly creative thinking, and applying it to produce results, powerful results for our customers. Some examples: mobilization, whether that's getting vaccines to all of the GPs in the Republic of Ireland during COVID, or helping mobilize 10 call centers for contact tracing, or today with small SMEs, helping them realize their potential as they have big offers in the alternative energy space. We also work in large infrastructure projects, getting them to site in half the time and getting them off site. We transform moribund and bureaucratic cultures into vibrant, high performance environments. Let me say a little bit about Charles and I. Charles and I have worked together for more than 24 years. He's an Emeritus Director of Vision Consulting, and his background in humanities, combined with his managing consulting career, is at the core of this book. Much of what's in the book, Charles and I have worked on practically with clients over the years. There are many challenging ideas in the book. I find the book challenging, and this presentation will be challenging. But over the years, I found that the things I disagreed most with Charles over time became the things that I learned to adopt and actually treasure and appreciate. So expect to be challenged, and maybe the challenges are actually the parts of this presentation that you'll find really valuable over time. Small bit of housekeeping. The session is being recorded. Charles will speak for just under 20 minutes, followed by some reflections by Fiona, and then by Mike. We will then do a question and answer session. You can post questions in the chat with the label Q&A. I don't expect that we will be able to answer every question. We'll probably take 4 or 5, but we do promise to answer every question subsequently. And without any further comment, I'd like to introduce you to Charles Spinosa, partner, colleague, friend, and mentor over many years. Charles.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm going to try to make this presentation I delivered today both fun and challenging. So I hope people will find it enjoyable. I want to thank Fiona and Mike for coming, and I've had them ask me some questions about the book, and they're very penetrating and very good. So thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody else who's attending, colleagues, clients, and the rest of the vision community. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity essentially to launch my book. So I'm going to share the screen now so that you can see the presentation. And I'm going to trust that Billy will tell me if it's all visible for everybody. Billy?
It's visible for me, Charles, yeah.
All right, okay, thank you. Okay, so today's presentation, it's Leadership as Masterpiece Creation. That's the title of the book. And today I'm going to talk about its contrarian heart. Now, its contrarian heart, the two things about it, it's kind of truth in advertising. I want you to know what the biggest contrary or challenging parts will be. And also, they're the most heartfelt chapters in the book. So how did I come to this book? What's the book about? Well, after 25 years of management consulting, I learned that leaders, the ones I was dealing with in business, have strongly held moral views on how to treat customers, employees, owners, and suppliers. They'd say things to me like, it is right to do X for our employees. It's right to do Y for our customers. It's right to do Y for our suppliers. And that rightness wasn't just its prudential, it was, this is the right way to treat people. And that's key. And I looked around me and I saw, well, small business proprietors show this moral sense all the time in their design of their shops and the way and different ways that they treat customers. Think of your different treatment at different local restaurants. And also industry shaping businesses such as Amazon and Google also show their moral sense through their different organizational cultures. Amazon is famous for its relentlessness. At Amazon, you need to work relentlessly, and that's good. At Google, it's famous for following dreams and psychological safety. Those are two different moral stands on what makes a good life, what makes a good company. And so at those two ends, it's very clear leaders are creating a kind of moral view in their businesses. And I grew to realize that my clients wanted to shape their businesses or business units according to their sense of what was right, and not some framework justified by operational or financial success. In fact, over the course of my career, I had helped them, I had given them frameworks that improved profits or improved productivity, and they would fade away if the leader didn't think they were right. And so, thanks to my training in the humanities, I noticed this drive to create what I call a moral masterpiece, a morally distinctive organization and place in the market, and found ways to nurture it. That's what the book is about. And to quickly run through the book, chapter 1 gives you stories of leaders who changed moral orders of their communities and their organizations by creating masterpieces. It's the examples to start with. Chapter 2 explores good lives today. Why do you want to create these things? And the issue is, unlike any other age that's come before us, we can criticize everything now. That's one of the understandings of secular society. A good life now is not based on a revered moral source, but a life admired by oneself and others. Chapters 3 and 4 set out masterpiece basics, managing moods, building trust, and listening for difference. Those of you who are vision clients know that well. Chapters, I'm skipping 5 and 6, chapters 7, 8, and 9 show how to create a masterpiece organizational culture, a masterpiece strategy, and a leadership style. And I want to call out Julia Robertson, a vision client, the CEO of Impellum, who let us use her case of transforming Impellum in chapter 8, excuse me. And then chapter 10, the last chapter, that might be one of the more academic chapters. That argues that masterpiece creation in this form of leadership depends on the gratitude of people that benefit from it, not the old heroic form of leadership that depended on obedience. But my masterpiece creating leaders are strong leaders and heroic in their own right. Okay, well, the chapters I'm going to take up today are chapter 5, and that takes up the decay of speaking truth and why we should return to it. And chapter 6, which claims that to create masterpiece organizations, leaders must take moral risks engage in shocking actions, and give up safety to change moral orders. Okay, those are the two big contrarian claims. I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to start with the decay of truth. And when I think of the decay of truth, I think of a lot of the people who write about how we want to have candor now. And Kim Scott seems to be the most popular voice for this. And she's quite clear about the place of truth. She says, I chose candor instead of honesty because there's not much humility in believing that you know the truth. Implicit with candor is that you're simply offering your view of what's going on and that you expect people to offer theirs. It's just offering one belief after another and sharing beliefs. And what comes to rule in that world? Well, agreeableness. The belief that is most agreeable is the one that's followed. I think we're missing following the belief that's true. However, I want to say, because of my background in humanities, she's got a strong pedigree behind her, a strong philosophical pedigree. And I turn to Richard Rorty, and he's a famous philosophical pragmatist. And they argued that only a belief could replace another belief. What's the point of that kind of claim? It sort of seems true. Well, it means that there's nothing beyond your beliefs that's true. And the example I always used when I was teaching the humanities was a heartwarming family dinner. For me, that family dinner sort of set out what I was as a father, set out what I was as a husband, set out the roles in the family and the concerns that we had as a family when we engaged in discussion as a family. And that had an inner truth that was richer than any particular belief I had about it. In fact, like a masterpiece, like an ethos, it's something I could return to generate more beliefs, to understand better, but its inner truth is better. That's what Kim Scott's view, that's what Richard Rorty's view gives up. Business has taken the Kim Scott view and really done something amazing with it. As I say, it uses agile to operationalize the devaluation of truth. So what does it look like to run an organization where you're devaluing truth all the time? Well, it means to implant agile. And I want you to realize, I'm going to say that agile produces enormous operational results. I'm just doubtful that it gives you a good life. The two spokesmen that I'm going to use are Colonel John Boyd, who invented agile in the Korean War, and Don Salt, whom I find to be the best spokesman for the agile organization. And the agile commercial world sprints around the loop, seeking and then exploiting advantages, seen from one position, then revising as it moves to the next position. Where did this come from? As I said earlier, it came from the Korean War. And in the Korean War, the Chinese MiGs were far superior planes to the US planes. They had better firepower. They had better defenses. They were much faster. The only slight advantage that our planes had was they had a full 360-degree canopy, and the controls were slightly easier to use. And so what did the pilots develop? They developed agility. You observe the situation, you orient your aircraft to get to where you need to get to take a shot, you decide to do it, and then you act and take a shot, or you don't, and you keep going around the loop, and you maneuver and maneuver until you get a shot and take it. And operationally, it worked extremely well. I think the kill rate was something like 9-1 in favor of agile. But, and when you apply it for corporate in operations and strategy, it just means seize opportunities more quickly than your rival. For investments, quickly shift resources out of less promising businesses and into attractive opportunities. But we don't pause to seek the truth about the desires of customers, the desires or lives of employees or shareholders. We do not pause. We're constantly moving, going after the next opportunity. In fact, my son, who does online marketing, says now with Facebook, you don't really know your customers. It's the algorithm that's choosing the customers that you are your ads go to. It's hard for me to see how people can be gripped by that and lead a good life. So can we recover truth? And can businesses help? And that to me is the real thing. I think businesses have the place of leadership in doing this, but we have to turn a little bit philosophical. And so I look back to Nietzsche. And Nietzsche was famous for considering styles, moral aesthetic styles, as having inner truths. One of the big examples was the aristocratic style. versus the bourgeois style. And you can see one is a style of honor and standing for stuff, and the other is the sweet, soft, bright life. And the two images you have there reflect that. He saw the style as having the inner truth, like the family dinner, richer than the beliefs about it. And his examples for style that I think are most pertinent for businesses were the Genoese palaces that revealed the norms of aristocrats who built them. But I think they're close to our business norms today. So I'm going to turn to those real quickly. You can see some palaces on the slide. What did Nietzsche say? He said the palaces showed the magnificent, insatiable desire of the lust for possessions and spoils. Okay, we can understand we want to do that in business, and but that lust finds a way to express the personal infinity, the moral and aesthetic sense of the aristocrat. So the desire for financial goods and so forth is only to express what you think is right, what you consider the right way to live. And it's all put together in a house that was a feast for the aristocrat's eyes. That's, I think, what we're missing today in business. That's what I'm trying to bring to businesses. So these palaces establish a new moral order, selfish lust for possessions. This is rejecting the old medieval view. You're proud of your lust for possessions. You're trying to express your personal infinity, and you're bringing these two together by creating something that is beautiful. And I hope you can admire the beauty of those palaces as I do. So masterpieces are masterpieces because they establish new moral orders. And that leads me to the next chapter in the book, chapter 6. And how do you create an admirable masterpiece? That's how do you change a moral order? And to get a good understanding of this, I'm going to turn to the philosopher Bernard Williams and his thought experiment around Gauguin. And so I'll tell that story very quickly, and it shows what changing a moral order is like. Gauguin was an artist in Paris who had a wife and 5 children, and he was sort of a struggling artist. Things were not going well. He had the intuition, a kind of anomaly, that if he just left his bourgeois trappings behind, he could create great art. And so he took the risk of following that, and he abandoned his family and went to Tahiti. And in Tahiti, it turned out the moral risk paid off. He was able to create this earthy, erotic, easygoing art. You can see his painting on the right compared to a typical Parisian family. It was not his family in the middle. That gives us a new sense of a whole new way of living. And for those of us who have changed our style, our way of living on the basis of that art and the things that follow from it, we feel gratitude for Gauguin. And so the moral question Bernard Williams asks, did Gauguin do the right thing? I think we have to say yes, at least if we are grateful for that art. And that is the kind of position that leaders in. They're taking actions that are shocking. And if we appreciate what comes of them, we have to say they did the right thing. And to give an example of that, I'm choosing Anita Roddick. And her example is really great, not only because of what she did, the masterpiece she created, but it's pretty close to Gauguin in her morally shocking action. So Anita Roddick started out looking at the beauty business, and she thought it terribly deceitful. She thought the grounding norm, which we can accept, was seeking physical attractiveness. She thought the clarifying norm, how do you seek it? Well, you have to appear youthful. That's the only way to be beautiful. And how did women manage holding these together? Well, they felt dissatisfied with their looks, and they would go out and buy products that were really offering miracle claims. Now, that's just plain deceit in her mind. But what really grabbed her was the anomaly, and that is women in the 70s and 80s had a growing sense of their autonomy. They didn't have to do what advertisers wanted them to do anymore, and they were developing a scientific understanding. They knew that the promises of the creams and lotions and so forth could not be fulfilled, and yet they nevertheless went to purchase things from the beauty business. So what to do? Well, the Roddick's, Gordon and Anita, ran a hotel and a restaurant. Anita Roddick convinced her husband, Gordon, to sell those businesses, get a loan, and start the body shop in Brighton. And the body shop in Brighton was all about inexpensive goods, having fun trying them on, and, well, having fun going through the assortment, and learning about traditional ways of taking care of skin from other cultures. So instead of just seeking physical attractiveness. And it succeeded. It succeeded beyond Gordon's expectations anyway. But even with the success of the store in Brighton, the beauty business ignored it. They thought she was just siphoning off a small segment of customers who didn't really matter anyway. And so Anita Roddick felt deeply that she wasn't changing the moral order, she wasn't changing the beauty business. And so she realized that the only way to impress the rest of the beauty business was to show that she could grow and grow fast. So she spoke to Gordon and her family and asked, Gordon was the one who was the banker who dealt with the banks, to go get more money so she could begin another store and then another store. And she, you can imagine the conversation. The competitors aren't trying to kill us off. Gordon, and that's a bad thing? Well, she wanted the competitors to be trying to kill her off. And so when Gordon went out of town, she sold half the shares of the body shop to a neighbor to get the money to create the second store. That's taking a moral risk. That's taking a moral risk with the marriage. That's taking a huge moral risk with the business as well. This was a business that was supposed to support the family. As the story goes, Gordon came back. He saw that she had the next shop up and running, and he accepted it. You can imagine that if the next shop or the shop started to fail, it would not have been accepted for long. But he did, and he supported her, and it went on to grow and grow and grow. The body shop became the retailer with the largest number of outlets around Europe and the rest of the world from the UK. She took a third moral risk. She really wanted experimentation in her stores to be joyful, and so she would let customers come in and try everything on and go out without paying. She was essentially teaching them to become shoplifters if they wanted to. You could go in the morning, put on your lotions, and just leave without paying anything. But it worked because people felt the kind of missionary sense behind the body shop. And so she did establish a new grounding norm, taking care of your bodies with knowledge, new clarifying norm that it's fun and you can do it with compassion and frugality. That's compassion towards animal testing and so forth. And the organizing norm was growth as a missionary sense to change the industry. And people were engaged in it as though it was a mission. And we can see it. The body shop has run into trouble recently, but new institutions like Sephora, Blue Mercury, ELF, and others are imitating what she did. So she really did displace the beauty business in doing that. And she created a new, I want to call it, masterpiece with a different moral offering. So what does this look like? Well, as I said, it's taking care of your bodies with knowledge, having fun sampling and testing, and a kind of missionary sense of growth. But my main point is that these three propositions, that doesn't add up to what the body shop was. The body shop, pictured there, had an inner truth that brought that all together that was richer than any of those expressions. And I hope that's the point I want to make about it. That's what we want to create when we create masterpieces. And finally, I want to say there's a whole new possibility that emerges. If businesses start creating masterpieces around the world, we get a new, what I call a narrow moral pluralism. I think this would be a new ethical achievement for our culture. And if you look at Amazon, its clarifying norms, as I said right at the beginning, are relentlessness and constantly raising the bar on employee requirements. At Amazon, it is right and beautiful to work relentlessly and to feel terrified about the rising bar and keeping customers. Feeling secure would be morally disdained at Amazon. Working on streams would be morally troubling unless they were precisely Amazon streams. In contrast, Google's clarifying Moral norms are psychological safety and giving employees time where economically feasible to work on their own creative work. At Google, it is right and beautiful to feel secure and to work on one's own dreams. Working with terror would be morally disdained at Google. Working relentlessly would at best be morally neutral. We can admire both, and that's what I find is the greatness here. We can have gratitude for two different moral stands, and that's different from our either sullen tolerance or our unforgiving dislike of any moral stand that is unlike ours. So in conclusion, what follows from this? Find your moral anomaly the way Anita Roddick did. Design a response, take the moral risks necessary to create your masterpiece organization, and let its distinctive moral order shine. Leadership is masterpiece creation. Thank you very much for listening. Billy, over to you.
Thank you, Charles. Let me just say one thing before I ask Fiona to comment. So you use very big examples, but one of the things that I'm struck by in the work that we do is that very often our teams working on customers just are completely taken by the level of resistance that they encounter when they're trying to bring something new. We have a situation at the moment, and the team on the ground are really being challenged by their customers on the ground, almost as if they're bringing something evil or threatening. And one of the things that you talk about that makes sense for me is that whenever you're bringing about real change and this idea of establishing a new moral norm, you're also threatening an old moral norm, and you get huge resistance. And without being absolutely convinced that this is the right thing to do, it is very easy to get caught up in that, to lose your conviction, lose your way, and deliver some compromise that ultimately is not good for the customer and probably not good for yourself. Fiona, like
well, that's a great segue for me, Billy. Thank you, and thank you, Charles, as well, and welcome to everybody on the call. And I guess when I was asked to join the webinar, I guess the concept of leadership as a masterpiece was something beyond my own expectation of myself. So I'm certainly challenged to see to the extent to which any kind of leadership roles I have even touched the basis of that concept of masterpiece. But, and Billy, you did say at the outset, and Charles, you also said in your presentation, this is a challenging concept and challenging both to think about and intellectualize, but also then to deliver. I think that's also a factor as well. But again, for me, the context is very much, I have a non-exec career. So it's a non-exec or chair role. So again, I'm not in an executive position within the organizations I work in at the moment. So the leadership is very much board leadership and at the sort of the top of the governance structure within an organization, which is a different type of leadership challenge than that might be experienced by an executive. And the second factor for me is that a significant amount of my experience is in the public sector. So to your point, Billy, that is a large and slow moving entity. And so the extent to which you control your strategy is pretty non-existent as well in the public sector, because often it's public policy or it's legislation or it's regulation. So you're somewhat constrained in the freedom that you might have, Charles, per your examples, to bring your own cultural norms to bear, your own moral norms to bear inside an organization, or indeed to work with others in a more strategic setting where you are a private sector organization or indeed a PLC. Now, I do accept that PLCs have shareholders, and that is another cohort that we have to think about as well. So I think when you encourage us, Charles, to think about our moral anomalies, when you work in the public sector, and that's what I wanted to address, it's whose moral anomalies are you dealing with? So I may have my own, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But also when I'm serving citizens, as I might often do in my role at Northern Ireland Office, Scottish Government, Network Rail in the UK, here in Ireland, the NTMA, CIE, and the Children's Hospital, my customers, as it were, are citizens in almost every case. And so that is a very heterogeneous and diverse moral cohort. And so their sense of what is right and wrong is very diverse. It's as diverse as the people that you meet on the street. So when you try to have that sense of moral leadership, And you might have it, to your point, Billy, inherently in yourself in terms of what you believe to be right and wrong in relation to how you might do something, run something, employ somebody, motivate somebody, or make a decision. You have to then think not about all of the other stakeholders that you have to deal with, particularly in the public sector. And that's not to say in the private sector you don't have a huge stakeholder group. Of course you do. But in my world, I have to think about civil servants. So what is their moral anomaly? And is my moral anomaly aligned with or totally divergent to their moral sense of things? Politicians. Again, I work in multiple different political jurisdictions. So again, dealing with politicians and their sense of what is right and wrong. And again, can be as diverse as those politicians themselves. My own employees, but then going back to the point earlier about customers, which I see as citizens. So again, before I ascend to the place in which I might be on my own moral high ground and think to bring that to bear within my leadership roles, I have to be very cognizant of those that are around me. And so again, for me, a couple of quick points I would make in terms of how I approach that really is, again, Billy, you made the point, and this comes, I guess, with age and experience when you go through life, is really being very comfortable with your own moral compass and your own sense of what is right and wrong. And I think that that does take time to develop. Some of us are born with a certain very strong moral compass, and sometimes it develops over time, and it is moderated by experience and by circumstances. So I think it is really, in order to be an authentic moral leader and to be able to speak truth to power and to be able to hold the line in that respect, you have to be very confident in your own sense. Now, confident does not necessarily mean that you have to articulate it at all times. And my second point really is around how you calibrate that. I am involved in a number of very contentious relationships at the moment. And I might believe that right is on my side in those cases. But I have to also calibrate that to acknowledge, as in all kind of conversations, that there are people who on the other side who also believe that they are right and that they are have those things on their side as well. You have to be consistent as well. So the other point about once you've attained to your own sense of moral right and wrong, you have to be consistent with that, and you can't blow with the wind, and you can't necessarily, now that may be a more significant factor in the private sector where you talked about agile, or you might have to pivot, or you might have to divest something or change direction or have a new product. But a lot of the work that I do, you have to be very consistent in that, in holding the line and looking at the long game. And then my last point, really, because I do think it'd be important, Billy, we get to some Q&A, is really around being prepared to be very unpopular. And I think that's a factor for leaders, whether it's an executive leader, whether it's a non-executive leader, is that if you have a strong sense of what is right and wrong, and you try to bring that to bear, both in your private life and in your working life, you're not always going to be popular. And you can suffer any significant number of criticisms in relation to that position that you might take. And I think that brings then a need for a fairly thick skin and a level of personal resilience, which again only comes with time and experience. So I think there are a couple of points I would maybe do as some framing, Billy, but maybe it's time to pass to Mike, and then we can pick up any questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, I just pick up one thing that you said. I was thinking about this on 2003, actually, part of when Charles joined Vision. We had a massive issue about whether we were going to continue to be an IT company or whether we were going to chase this thing called commitment-based management. I lost many friends in that period, and there are many guys who've traveled with me who still don't speak to me today because in their view, I destroyed a very good IT company for some crazy dream. So you have to be, so your point about be prepared to be unpopular for the sake of a big goal, that's part of what comes with the leadership territory. Thanks, Fiona. Mike?
Great, thank you, Billy. Again, I'll give a little bit of context about how I came to the book. Then I pick out three things that I thought I'd pose. Hopefully Charles can pick up those as we move into Q&A. So my background is large corporate. I've always worked in the private sector. Organizations like IBM, Barclays, Prudential in the UK, and always sought to develop a culture and framework way of working around me, whether I was in even within a large organization. More recently, and certainly over the last 3.5 years, I found myself as chief executive of a small growth company, a software company, which has been a really interesting challenge to transition from large corporate to a smaller organization where, to the point about stakeholders, I have two substantial foreign investors that I talk to on a weekly basis, and I've had an organization which I've had to transform from one shape into another. So that's a little bit about background. Hopefully that will provide some framework for the points I've made. So the first thing is I have the book, and I was telling Charles last week, it's riddled with my scribbles, and therefore I'm going to have to buy another copy. And to Billy's earlier point, it's not an easy read, but it's worthwhile because of that. And so when I look at the three areas that I've chosen to kind of pick on and reflect on my own experience is the first thing when you come to a management book. One tends to look at it from one's own perspective. And in looking at it myself, I felt I was almost narcissistic. I was looking at how Charles was unpicking this idea of masterpiece and reflecting on my own challenges, my own behaviors, and how I delivered change within my own organization. And so my kind of first challenge was reading the book and thinking about, and they've been referred to in Charles's presentation, around Google, around Amazon, around Apple, for example, or Anita Roddick's Body Shop, is a question about whether masterpiece in essence is a self-portrait, that for those people who have an opportunity to create as founders organizations, whether largely those organizations are actually fantastic self-portraits. So that, because whenever we're going through all of the chapters, I was making comparisons with the sorts of challenges that I've been facing. And that kind of brings me on to the second area, or second question, which was really around this idea of truth and candor. Now, Charles and I have previously written together a document on trust. Trust is very important to me. So I inherited a company which had had some challenges. And I'm not going to go into those here, but actually establishing a framework of trust within the organization really enforced for me the idea of candor, that there is no point in lecturing people about truth. Candor is a bridge to establishing authenticity and therefore trust. And therefore I've always, not just within my own organization today, but throughout my career, tried to be very candid about the position the company is in and the actions we need to take. And that can be quite uncomfortable. But I found that actually being candid about the challenges, often sharing more information than perhaps other leaders would, has enabled me to gather together people to make and deliver change more seamlessly. And then the kind of third area I was going to pick up on was this idea of moral risk, which is kind of interesting because I think if you were doing a self-portrait in an organization, the moral risks you face, the things that challenge the way, the very nature of you, actually distort in some respects, perhaps make more impressionist, the self-portrait. And there are often issues around people, as Billy was saying, taking different directions in the organization. But there come points where, as a leader, you have a vision for the direction you're taking the organization. And in order to do that, you sometimes have to go outside what you might consider your moral norm. And that's very difficult, very, very difficult. And I think the one thing I've learned is sometimes those things that you most fear, the most difficult questions, which many leaders leave to the last thing they do, is actually the first thing you do. So those are, three things I've sort of just positioned. We'd love to hear Charles's response I probably got it all wrong, and I always find Charles's challenge great. But hopefully that's a good switch into the QA session, which I'm hoping is going to be very lively indeed. Back to you, Billy.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I just want to make one comment and then ask Charles to make some observations. The fascinating thing that you're saying, Charles, and you explore a lot of different philosophical concepts, but you articulate truth in terms of the truth of a family dinner, which actually, it's not about beliefs. It's not about huge philosophical concepts, but that essential truth of actually that's essentially true. That's really interesting to think about truth in a different way. Just something you said, Mike, triggered that with me. But Charles, look, I'd love to hear you respond to Fiona and Mike for about 5 minutes, and then I'll pick up some questions.
Okay, and I'll even try to go faster. So let me start with Mike first, since that's, I think, what's on everybody's mind. And your last point that you made, Mike, about how going outside your normal sense of what you do is of first importance. That's essentially the core of this book. That we leaders are so much told that they should follow this operational framework or that operational framework, that they think that that's what they do, and they think that that's leadership. And of course, you can achieve operational success, but you don't have a good life as a leader when you do that. And my point is precisely that. It's when you are pushing for something that you believe is true and important, and you go beyond your norms. I want to say that that's the typical act of a leader. The other acts might be acts of managers, but that is, and the point of the book is to begin thinking about that as the center of your life. Another way I put this is the leaders I've dealt with, they were trying to create masterpieces behind their backs. They couldn't really focus on it. They were doing one operational framework, another operational framework, but deep in their hearts and then behind their backs, they'd be making these shifts. I want to bring those shifts out into the light. And that's where you do have to be courageous, to speak to Fiona's point and Mike's point. I want to say, knowing you, Mike, when you talk about your candor, what makes your candor so effective is you are really speaking truth, because people know when you tell them what's what, that this is something that you experience very deeply, and you can learn from it, and you can think about it. And it's not just the view that you happen to have of the day. It is a view that represents you. And that takes me to the self-portrait, which I think connects what Fiona was saying, or what I want to say to Fiona, with what Mike was saying. Mike said, I wonder if these masterpieces are self-portraits. And my answer is, in a certain sense, they are self-portraits, but in another sense, they're evolving. And you'll notice with Anita Roddick, she took 3 moral risks, and that's what leaders do. They take moral risks and more moral risks and more moral risks, and as they do, they evolve the moral order that they are in. But they do start with a moral anomaly that is personally very deeply affecting to them. And so that brings me to Fiona. Fiona was very, very articulate around how there are many moral anomalies around in her world, which, by the way, is unusual for me to hear. Most people I speak with have a hard time grasping that there are moral anomalies. And a moral anomaly is where there's a troubling situation and it's not clear what the right thing to do is. Doing this thing seems like it's doing something wrong, even if it can have a good effect. Doing the more normal thing, you can follow the procedures, but you don't think you're going to overcome the difficulty. And so there isn't a right way to do it. My answer is, when you're surrounded by a world of moral anomalies, choose the one that matters the most to you. I think that's how we develop our moral sense of ourselves. And that's how we develop our moral understanding. And that's how we develop our good life. And that happens even within the constraints of the public service, even within the constraints of an industry. You're always figuring out what the right way to treat your employees is, how to stretch them, whether you're stretched too far, whether you're not stretching enough, whether you have to actually stretch them in a new way. I find many middle managers stretching employees. One recently I ran into had a very laissez-faire sales organization. Everybody was a hunter, went off and went after the biggest amount of sales, and she wanted to turn it into a collaborative place. And she did, but that was required her to fire some people and reward people for collaborating and changing the moral center of the organization. And she did, and I believe there's always room for that. Okay, I didn't want to go on too long. So those are my quick responses.
Okay, I'm going to pick up some questions that have come through, Charles. I'm going to bias in favor of those people who've put their...
No, just one moment, Charles. We seem to have lost Billy. Seem to have lost Billy there, Charles.
I see him, his photo on the screen. Do you have the questions, Edwina?
I do. I can call it. Oh, here we go.
Oh, there's Billy.
Sorry, back now. Go ahead.
My internet dropped. So let me pose a first question to you, Charles, if you can hear me.
I can hear you. We can't hear you now.
I think Billy has frozen there. Edwina, maybe do you want to just start with the question?
Yeah, absolutely. I can jump in with the question. A question from Francisco. How does authenticity show up both in the leadership style and in the day-to-day of the organization, the masterpiece? Can inauthenticity kill the masterpiece?
And inauthenticity kill the masterpiece? It depends on what the masterpiece is. That's a really rich question. The first thing I need to say is authenticity has so many different meanings today that it's hard to know what to talk about. In the book, in I think the third chapter, I talk about the different meanings of authenticity. There's being true to your feelings, and and that form of authenticity, and if you're creating an organization based on that, you're not going to have all the revision and the changes that you need to create more genuine masterpiece organizations. But if that's the masterpiece organization, you can have it. There's being true to the nature of being a human being, which is the way the philosophers in the 20th century looked at authenticity. And what does that mean? That means the nature of a human being, there are two big ones in contestant, that you have infinite passion, that you devote to something finite. Yeah, if you don't have that, you're not going to be taking moral risks. The other notion of authenticity in the 20th century is that what are human beings? Human beings are changeable. And the idea is that we need to be consistent. We need to stick with what we're doing, but we can't get stuck. And that is a core part of what I'm asking leaders to do. Stick with what they're doing. And when you are about to get stuck, that is when you're facing a moral anomaly that you have to design a way around. But there's another way of understanding of authenticity, which is what philosophers in the 20th century thought was totally inauthentic. And that other understanding, the true north understanding, is basically following the moral norms. And this book is about shifting moral norms of your organization, at least, and probably the community of people who deal with your organization. And if you lose any of those forms of authenticity, yes, you are going to lose the masterpiece. You'll end up in the world of agility where you're just chasing one opportunity after another after another.
I might come in there while I'm waiting for maybe Billy to rejoin, if that's okay, Charles, and respond. I think the other challenge as well is, I took a note here on my own, is again, the heterogeneous nature of the workplace and of global society and the scale of communication and visibility. So when in the old days, our authenticity might have been reasonably private and exercised in a corporate setting. Now it's writ large over social media and over all sorts of other channels. And you think about what my 23-year-old daughter in New York right now might consider authentic and real versus what I do, versus what other folks might do as well. So I think the authenticity, holding the line on that. I totally agree with your comment, but I wouldn't say it's diluted, but it's just there's a much broader brush or more broader scope and scale of interpretations of authenticity than possibly would have ever been the case before.
I just want to say, I totally endorse that view. That's part of what the book is about in the end, which is there are different moral orders, and different companies have different moral orders, different generations have different moral orders. And right now we live in a world where that's not accepted. People within one moral order just see the other as totally wrong, immoral, or if they're being charitable, amoral. And at best, they're either totally unforgiving and out on the streets protesting, or offering a sullen tolerance. I can't change this person. I don't have the power to change the person, so I'm just going to let it go. I want us to develop a sense of gratitude for these different moral orders. I think if we can have that gratitude, we have much more room to maneuver. If we're saying, this is the way I want to go, this is how I want my organization to work, this is what's going to be good and wonderful about it, this is why we'll have good lives here. I'm not saying you guys can't do it differently in your department or in your organization. Billy, are you back?
No, Billy is not back. Oh,
Okay.
Yes, I am.
Yes, he is. Beg your pardon.
I see a question from my old friend Mitchell Lenson. You may have partly answered it, Charles, but I'd maybe like you to. So Mitchell asks, how do more norms around culture, working practices, etc., need to evolve with the Gen Z perspective of work and life?
Well, that's a big question. And it depends what aspect of the Generation Z moral norm. My view is moral norms are constantly shifting and evolving within generations as well as across generations. If we're trying to find a way to satisfy, and this goes to one of Fiona's issues, other people, you have a moral anomaly, focus on resolving the moral anomaly that's there in your heart. You're not going to change the entire moral scope of the world. You're not going to decide that murder is suddenly okay, or that eating your own children is suddenly okay. You have a moral anomaly that's far more local. Focus on that. Come up with a resolution. And I have always found in my experience, I can't give you a principled philosophical reason for this, but if you do that and you do it beautifully, you will attract people from other generations. You don't have to attract everybody from Gen Z to your company. You need to attract people who see that there's something distinctive that you are doing and find that that moral truth, that inner truth resonates. If you do that, you'll get more and more people coming. And you get your core, it's just like selling to your customers. You sell to your core customers are going to talk to your other customers, and you'll get an expanding consumer base. The same is true for your employees. The same is true for other constituencies.
Thank you, Charles. Another question from Peter Luff. You have kind of addressed this, but I expect that it's a concern of many people. Peter's question is, do you downplay the importance of agility? What is your view on the business credo, move fast and break things?
Do I downplay agility? No, I say agility is an enormously attractive infection. It can get us ahead. It can get us ahead quickly. It can enable us to win wars. I don't think that's downplaying agility. I have not yet seen the argument that says agility gives you a good life. And that I do downplay. So if there's an argument out there, Don Saul doesn't argue it, and I used to write with Don Saul. He's the most articulate person I know. He doesn't make that claim. If you got a claim that being agile and constantly looking for one opportunity, the next opportunity, the next opportunity, with nothing guiding you other than the advantages that come from that opportunity, I don't believe that that will give you a good life. I don't believe you're going to be able to admire yourself. That's what I'm downplaying. Now, the Zuckerberg credo was, say it again, Billy, move fast, break things. Is that it?
Let me just, yes, move fast and break things. Yeah.
I think that meant something to Zuckerberg when he announced it. I think it's become a slogan. I don't think it's got a whole lot of moral evaluation to it, but it seems to me if it does, it goes with agility. Moving fast is a kind of maneuvering. Breaking things, I believe in taking moral risks in the face of anomaly. That's breaking things. That's what I say gives you a meaningful life. In certain industries, you probably have to break things and move fast. Maybe in the IT industry, you do. We should let Mike come in on this. But to me, it's more of a slogan than it is a moral stance. Mike, do you want to say anything about Zuckerberg? And you're on mute, by the way.
There we go. I'm not on mute anymore. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. I think it's something about culture that it signals that you want people in fast-moving organizations to not fear retribution for trying something new, if that is consistent with the masterpiece that you're trying to develop, which typically in a growth company is exactly what you want. So I think it's a kind of cultural aspect rather than anything else. But that it's in the context of it's part of the culture, if you like, the canvas on which your masterpiece is painted.
Mike is always great for the most charitable contribution, interpretation of anything. So that is quite a piece of charity. This is just how Mike builds trust. It's really cool. So far as that's what it means, so far as it means, don't be reluctant to make a mistake, to take a risk. I entirely endorse it. And a lot of the book is about developing the courage to do that instead of the psychological safety imposed by the senior manager. But yeah, absolutely. Take the risks. You've got to take the risk.
Yeah.
And to have a good life, I want to say.
Yeah.
So another question, Mike, and maybe I'm interested in Fiona's comment on this, and we kind of discussed it, but it's come up a little bit. How can the approach that you're espousing be applied to large infrastructure projects to avoid the long delays and ballooning budgets that are often associated with those critically important endeavors?
Gosh, that's another big question, isn't it? Big projects I've run many in my time. It's about having a vision for the masterpiece that you're trying to create. And usually the issues that come into play, which delay, is because the many parties involved in the program of activity are not necessarily aligned to the vision of the masterpiece you're trying to create. And so I think any of us who've been involved in change over the last 30 years will know it's the people who get in the way, and change management and engaging authenticity, all the things we've talked about are the things that get in the way of these major programs. And also, of course, if I'm thinking of things like HS2 in the UK, is a vision where the ambition was well short of the understanding of the budget, actually. So the thing I take away from the book, whether you're working in a large organization with responsibility for a department, or in my case now running a growth company, as the leader, have the masterpiece as your objective, and provide that vision for people, and they will follow you. And I've applied that, whether it's been in, as I say, in running a group, a department, or a geography in IBM. And I strongly adhere to that in AntWorks as running a kind of growth company. The last thing I'd say is the reason why I like the book so much is I really understand that for my investors, I am trying to create a masterpiece for them, because the objective of running a VC-backed company is to create a masterpiece that has value in the marketplace. And so I'm not sure whether that answers the question, but it's how I feel.
Thank you, Mike. And if you're okay, I'm going to take that as your closing comments because we're right at the end. And Fiona, I'd like you to quickly comment as well.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Ask for Charles, who's closing.
Yeah, no, sure, absolutely. And actually, I often use the analogy of HS2. So I run the Children's Hospital project here in Ireland, which is sort of the HS2 of Ireland in terms of scale of budget overruns and time overruns. So I agree. For me, it's a non-alignment between the two parties. So I have the vision, the state has a vision to build a children's hospital, but that's meeting the commercial realities of the contractor. So there's just not an alignment there. And the second point I would make just quickly, Billy, is trust and respect. And if they're not there, then these infrastructure projects are extremely difficult to deliver. Thanks.
Thank you. Charles, thanks, Fiona.
I'll say something very quickly about these mega projects, the infrastructure projects, and then I'll just close off. Is that okay, Billy?
Yeah.
Okay, so see, I believe there is emerging a new moral order for handling infrastructure projects. Infrastructure projects, these big projects, normally it's a bunch of suppliers and the owner, and they're facing contracts that are supposed to produce financial goods for both, but they get gamed. And it's that gaming that kills these projects. The people behind integrated program delivery are trying to create communities. And that's what we need to do. And the story of Heathrow Terminal 5 is an example of creating a community. And when you create a community, people give and take. And when people give and take, you can have that project going. And to close, this has been a very interesting thing because people seem to be getting sort of the most difficult moral side of the book, which is that we can have different communities and we create different moral orders in our company and in other places in the world. And that if we can do that and have gratitude for that difference, we can find a way to get along. We can find a way to identify moral anomalies and design around them. So that's what I wish that everybody here who is listening does. And I'd like to thank everybody who has participated, and thank you for those questions.
Thank you. Listen, thank you everybody for tuning in to the conversation. So my last reflection is actually, and it's weird, it's an anomalous one also, which is leaders, business leaders, you're proposing that business leaders take responsibility for creating a good life for themselves and their people, which looks like more work, but actually it leads to better organizations, better performance, and something that everybody can be proud of, which I think in today's troubled world is a very, very interesting way to look at the things. Thank you everybody for pitching in. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Charles.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.